I think my mom must have been bullied or something when she was growing up. I mean, she never really told me as much, but for some reason, she had an awful lot of empathy for one kid in my class that was bullied. Although I didn't even really like him that much, she pretty much forced me to hang out with this guy. His name was Colin, and she made me do it all the time. He didn't really have any friends, so she kinda took it upon herself to force me to be one. She even once made me sleep over at his house. Colin was just kinda weird. He talked to himself a lot and answered himself as well. It made us all think he must be really crazy or something. My other friends gave me a ton of grief for hanging out with him, but what could I do really? I always did what my mom asked of me, even if it wasn't something I really cared to do. When Colin asked me to sleep over at his place, I was unfortunate enough to have my mom in the same room as us. She overheard and answered for me right away. So here I was, losing an entire Saturday night, sleeping over at this weird kid's house. Colin's parents were a bit odd too. They must have known how few friends he had, because they seemed super appreciative I was even hanging out with them at all. They kept on thanking me and offering me anything I wanted to eat. They even let me choose what to watch on television. They just kinda did whatever they could to show me how much they appreciated I was his friend, which meant they probably didn't know he was simply a charity case. When we went to bed, I noticed that Colin had bunk beds. However, rather than take the top bunk, he instead chose to sleep on the floor. When I asked him why, he told me this: "I always have to save the top bunk for the other Colin." When I asked him what he was talking about, he just shrugged and ignored me. He curled up in a sleeping bag and went right to sleep. Well, I'm not really sure how I could possibly fall asleep after hearing that, but eventually I did manage to. I woke up though sometime in the middle of the night when I heard some ominous whispering. Without raising out of bed, I opened my eyes and looked over at Colin. He was sitting up in his sleeping bag, rocking back and forth. While he rocked, he kept on whispering unintelligible things. I was used to knowing that this kid talked to himself all the time, but this was so much creepier. He just kept on whispering, all while dramatically swaying forwards and backwards on the floor. My God, I thought to myself, something really is wrong with this guy. I closed my eyes and tried to make myself fall back asleep. Somehow I managed to once again. The next time I woke up though, it was unclear at first as to what had woken me up. It was still dark when I opened my eyes, but I almost jumped out of my skin. Colin was sitting right at the edge of the bed, staring over me with a huge smile on his face. I asked him what was wrong, but he wouldn't answer me. He just sat there and continued to stare. He didn't even blink a single time. I kept asking him if something was wrong, but he just smiled and didn't seem to have any clue I was trying to interact with him. I closed my eyes and prayed this was just a dream. While I laid there, I honestly felt this kid was some sort of psychotic or something. I didn't really know what I could do. If I told his parents I wanted to go home, well, what could I tell them that would convince them to let me? My mom, of course, would also be pissed at me for not spending the entire night. With how she acted, you can of course imagine that she wouldn't believe a single thing I told her. She'd just think I was prejudging the poor kid like everyone else did. I closed my eyes for a long time, trying to ignore everything and imagine it was just a dream. If I ever did fall back asleep, it surely wasn't a restful one, although I can't remember doing so. What caused me to finally open my eyes once again, though, was a kicking sound on the top bunk. I thought to myself that Colin must have climbed up on top because this other Colin he had mentioned made him. I heard 10 kicks before I started to get annoyed. I opened my eyes and shouted for him to stop. "Stop what?" Colin groggily asked me. I froze when I noticed the voice was coming from the floor. I looked over and saw Colin was sleeping in a sleeping bag. I immediately jumped out of the bed, almost like how someone would jump away from a spider or something. I didn't see anyone on the top bunk though. Colin shook his head and he seemed to immediately understand. "Oh, just go back to bed. I think he'll leave you alone now." I didn't want to get back in that bed. I chose to sleep on the floor far away from everything. I tried to get Colin to talk about what that was, but he just fell asleep and refused to talk to me. I couldn't fall asleep at all though. I laid there all night, looking at the top bunk and wondering what just happened. I can't claim that my memory of what happened that night is perfect though. There's a possibility that Colin's weird behavior before simply made me imagine the sounds. I don't really know, but I can sure as hell tell you that I stopped hanging out with Colin, even though my mom did get really pissed with me. When I was 12, I had a really scary encounter when I was spending the night at my friend Jenny's house. It was a Friday night. Although it was set up as a supervised sleepover with Jenny's mom there, at about 8 p.m., her mom got called into work suddenly. She was a nurse, so it wasn't really unusual for this to happen, and it wasn't unusual either for Jenny to spend a lot of time home alone, even at her young age. Jenny's mom just gave us the normal rules. Stay up on the second floor as much as possible, and if anyone comes to the door, just pretend that no one was home. We didn't mind having the place to ourselves for many reasons, least of all that we were able to stay up as late as we wanted and do whatever we wanted to do. Around 10 p.m., we were still up in Jenny's room watching television when we heard someone ringing the doorbell. We weren't really expecting to hear that so late at night. Of course, we were very curious as to who this could possibly be. We also knew what the rules were though, so we didn't just go to answer the door right away. It was hard not to, because whoever it was kept ringing the bell over and over again, very frantically. It was nearly 5 minutes of ringing before it stopped as abruptly as it had started. We were both still very curious as to who the hell that was, but now we didn't really concern ourselves too much. That is, until about half an hour later, when the doorbell began to frantically ring again. It startled us, as we hadn't expected the person to come back. Even this time, the doorbell rang over and over again for nearly 15 minutes. It was unnerving. I'm not even sure if I can tell you exactly how it felt. It was nerve-wracking to hear the doorbell over and over again, knowing we couldn't go down to answer the door no matter what. Honestly, we didn't even think it was a good idea to sneak a peek out the window and see who it was, just on the off chance they might see us. We also couldn't make the ringing stop, and we really wanted it too. When it finally did stop for the second time, we were already so wound up that it was hard for us to relax. Jenny tried calling her mom, but being a nurse, it was very often difficult to get in touch with her while she was working. We left a message for her to get back with us as soon as she could, but there was really no telling when that might be. For a while afterwards, we were just very uneasy, but the ringing did not come again. I can't explain why we felt like that, other than it was simply the fact we didn't know who it was that was driving us crazy. At some point, I began to get very thirsty. It must have been the nerves from what was happening, but I felt my mouth getting drier and drier until I knew I would have to go downstairs and grab something to drink. By the time me and her finally braved the trip downstairs together, it had been nearly an hour and a half since the second time we'd heard the doorbell ring. Walking down the stairs was a bit of a chore. With every step, I expected the doorbell to suddenly start ringing again, or for something to jump out in front of us and grab our feet as we were walking down. We, however, made it all the way down to the bottom without a single incident. Finally realizing that whoever it was must be long gone and we were surely safe, Jenny and I went into the kitchen, grabbed ourselves a drink, and took a couple of minutes to make a snack. We were soon about to get ready to head back upstairs. I noticed, though, that Jenny had stopped now. She was looking right past me at the back door. When I turned around, I almost had a heart attack when I saw a man silently standing there, leaning against the window and holding a knife against the window glass. I screamed, but Jenny did the smarter thing. She ran over to the house phone, picked it up, and called 911. "I'm calling the cops, you asshole!" The guy just smiled and pressed his face into the glass. He chuckled, then gave the window a kiss before running off into the night. The police were able to get a hold of Jenny's mom, and she came home, but there was no one anywhere to be found. Seeing that guy was startling enough, But that's not the thing that scared me the most. The thing that terrified me the most was the fact this guy must have not only known we were home, but that we were home alone as well. The ring of the doorbell must have been done deliberately to make us uneasy. How long had he been patiently waiting and watching for us where he was watching from? I don't know. I was stalked by a guest in my student accommodation. I'm 19 years old and living far from home in a studio room. I'm often up late, and last week I was doing some laundry at around 11 p.m.-ish. I saw a man sitting in the lobby. I'd seen him around a bit at night before, but I didn't really ever think too much of him. There I was in the laundry room. I just put my clothes in the dryer, and I heard the laundry room door beeping. That meant someone was currently coming in. There I saw the man, standing there with no clothes to wash, just staring at me from the doorway. I maneuvered around him and headed to the lifts, and he followed quickly behind me. He cornered me and asked me for my Snapchat. I was tired and just wanted to get back to my room, so stupidly, I gave it to him. I figured he'd message and try to flirt, and I'd simply say, "I have a boyfriend. Sorry if you thought this was anything else." Surely that would be the end of it. Anyway, almost right away he started messaging me. It was kind of normal at first. Then he started to say the real weird stuff. "I saw you a month ago, you know. I was really impressed. I've been visiting a friend and staying here so I can see you. I've been watching you. I notice you come out mostly at night. Why is that?" He told me he would be sticking around for 5 more days. Then it started to get worse. "I love you. I can't help it." When I told him I had a boyfriend, he said, "But I only want you." He continued to ignore what I'd said. He asked to come to my room, and I of course said no. Then he asked me to give him a hug. He asked me if I lived alone, if I was a virgin. He kept on repeating that he loved me so much, and he knew I was perfect for him, that I'd really impressed him. At that point, I recorded all the messages I could on Snapchat. I spoke to him a little bit more to gather some evidence so I could take it down to reception in the morning. He'd been watching me for the entire month. I got my friend who lives on the 2nd floor to walk me down to the laundry room, and we sat in the student lounge area. My friend tried to calm me down. I could see him walking around the laundry room, looking for me, but luckily I'd already picked up my things, and he didn't seem to notice me. I ran back to my room. My friend offered me to stay in his room, but I said it was okay since I could just lock my door. At around 1 a.m. though, I heard someone outside my room trying to pick the lock. I asked my friend if he was outside, and he said no. I froze. I didn't want to make a sound. I felt sick to my stomach and helpless. Eventually, when they were unsuccessful, whoever it was took off running. In the morning, I reported this to reception and then went to stay a few days with my boyfriend. Then after, I went to London to visit a friend. Last night was the first time I'd spent a night in my room since this happened. I'm very paranoid now, and sadly, I should probably be used to this. It's not the first time I've had someone stalk me. One guy even followed me into the club and tried to grab my head, and a bunch of other things have happened as well that I won't go through. Anyway, I'm terrified to go outside my room after dark, and I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling paranoid that man will appear once again. I live in a major metropolitan area, DC, and try to practice keen situational awareness and stay aware of any present danger. Alright, that was putting it lightly. To be honest, I've seen some scary shit and become paranoid as fuck because of it. I'm a fairly petite person already, who's looked 16 for the past decade and is therefore an easy target for creeps. Depending on what part of the city I'm going to, or how late I plan to be out, I sometimes strap a fixed blade to myself. I conceal it under my pants or in my boot in the winter, and in summer I either strap it to my arm or somewhere around my waist. It's not exactly the most comfortable, but you can never be too prepared. It was raining on this night. I was wearing an oversized retro windbreaker that I had just found at the thrift store. The knife was tucked away in my purse. The humid DC summer made my skin sticky, and the thought of having a sheath around my arm was very unappealing. I got onto the metro towards home, but the conductor announced that the train was going to go out of service on the stop just before mine. One of my buddies lived 2 blocks away from that metro stop, so I texted him, seeing if he wanted me to stop by and smoke him up for a bit. He responded, saying he would be on his balcony, and I could stop by and just yell for him to let me into the building whenever I came. On the train, I usually listen to music, read, crochet, or stare out the window with regular intervals of casing the train for any sketchy shit. Once in a blue moon, people get robbed on the metro, and if I see packs of teens or people moving up and down the aisle without sitting down, I pack up and tuck my bag underneath myself. It was right before rush hour, and the train was fairly full this time. I didn't really sense anything unusual until I noticed a guy who looked sort of out of place, sitting just across the aisle and facing me. DC has people from all over, and people rarely, if ever, stand out to me as looking suspicious, but something about this guy was easily triggering my spidey senses. The man was abnormally skinny and had greasy dark hair. Looked sort of Eastern European, I'd guess. He was wearing a purple button-down and some tight pants, and kept talking on the phone while checking another phone in his lap. I speak Spanish and a bit of Russian, so I can get the gist of some similar languages. I could tell he appeared to be speaking in some sort of Italian, describing a small female with brown hair and a jacket. He also kept saying sola, which really got my attention, as that means alone in many languages. I started to get a bit anxious at that point. My heart pounded harder every time he looked in my direction. Best case scenario, he was some slimy dude describing me to his friends, but life is too short to count on the best case scenario. I placed my bag in my lap and discreetly strapped the knife to my arm underneath the sleeve of my jacket, just in case. I texted my friend to see if he could meet me at the station itself, so I wouldn't have to walk there alone. The reception on the train was bad though, and the text never went through. The train arrived at my stop. I tried to wait until the very last second to get off, so the man wouldn't follow me. The doors closed a second or two right behind me, but the skinny dude managed to slip right through them because of his abnormal skinniness. I started picking up the pace and tried to get lost in the crowd on the way to pay my fare. Once I had paid, I started booking it to my friend's place. I tried not to run too fast to make myself less visible. I turned around and saw that no one seemed to be behind me, but I couldn't relax until I'd arrived at my friend's apartment. There was a big burly guy who lived near my friend's building and would blast 80s jams and work out on his porch every evening. I prayed he would still be out there by the time I passed by his house, so I could chill there for a second and call my friend. I walked by, but unfortunately the man didn't seem to be working out tonight. I heard footsteps behind me and turned around. Just as I'd feared, the purple shirt man was following me, and he was swiftly gaining on me. I started to run, and in my panic, I didn't realize there was a car stopped in the middle of the road a few feet ahead of me with the side door wide open. The guy caught up to me and lunged his hands around my waist. He was surprisingly strong for such a skinny guy. In one of what is probably the most crucial decisions of my life, I slipped the knife out from its sheath and stabbed wherever I could, flailing to get free. I heard fabric rip. The serrated knife had gotten caught on his shirt. I used the leverage of him gripping me to actually aim this time. I slammed the knife under his button-down and pushed it in as hard as I could. I had never been more aware of how fundamentally defenseless I am than that moment. I couldn't even scream or make a sound at all. It was like I had gone completely mute or was holding my breath or something. I have no idea how deeply I'd stabbed the man or how injured he was. Honestly, I didn't care. He dropped me in an instant, and I ran across the street, almost getting hit by a passing car. I sprinted up to my friend's apartment. I noticed an empty cop car sitting next to my friend's building. and this made me even more paranoid. At the time, and probably still, my gut instinct was the police would care more about me having a knife on me than almost getting kidnapped. My friend buzzed me into his building, and I went inside, going straight to his bathroom without even saying hello. I washed the blood off my knife and the scrapes I had gotten in the struggle. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for some reason, I decided not to tell my friend what just happened. I sat with him on his balcony and hung out and laughed as if nothing had ever happened. I can't tell if it was simply shock or just being so desensitized from the city. But to this day, I still occasionally have moments where I realize the gravity of what happened that day. Writing it out helps me wake up a bit. To the psycho in the purple button-down, I'm not really sorry I stabbed you. I hope it went in real deep.